Good morning, everyone. Nice to see you all again. I hope you had a good rest after yesterday. So apologies that the bus schedule could not be changed, so you had to reach early again. I hope you had some time to catch up on your work as well. So to start off today, my director, my boss, Abdul, was supposed to be here, but he had some technology emergency and had to return to Manila. But he was able to record his opening remarks, which Mel will now play. And then we'll start off with our sessions.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Day 2 of the International Workshop on Gender and Disasters. My name is Abdul Abiad, and I'm a director in the Economic Research Department of the ADB. I was hoping to join you in person, but due to unforeseen circumstances, I have to fly back to Manila and deliver these opening remarks by video instead. One priority under ADB's Strategy 2030 operational plan is to promote gender equality and empower women across 5 different dimensions. First is enhancing women's economic empowerment. Second, improving gender equality in human development. Third, strengthening women's participation in decision-making and leadership. Fourth, reducing women's time, poverty, and drudgery. And fifth, building women's resilience to external shocks. Central to this is ADB's Climate Change Action Plan, which recognizes the differential impacts of climate change on women and men. ADB supports our developing member countries in integrating gender equality into national policies, ensuring women's involvement in decision-making, and enhancing their role in climate resilience. The goal is to ensure that women's specific needs, for example, as caregivers, workers, and food providers, are prioritized in climate action and development strategies. Gender-responsive disaster management requires a multi-layered, collaborative effort involving action at every level. At the global scale, initiatives like the Sendai Gender Action Plan set the foundation for integrating gender considerations into DRRM frameworks. At the country level, governments play a pivotal role in translating these global frameworks into actionable policies and strategies. Day 1's plenary session offered an excellent discussion of the progress and challenges in accelerating the implementation of the Sendai Gender Action Plan in Bangladesh, Nepal, and Sri Lanka. On this Day 2 of the workshop, you will engage with a diverse range of stakeholders, including NGOs, civil society organizations, policy advocates, and international organizations, all of whom are actively working at the grassroots level across South Asian economies to create tangible change. Equally critical is the role of research and data, as evidence-based approaches are essential to designing effective policies, understanding differential needs, and measuring the impact of interventions. Finally, investment, finance, and insurance are key drivers of change, providing the necessary resources to scale up these efforts and ensure sustainable, long-term resilience. What do we want to take away from today's sessions? Here are some suggestions from my end. First, we want to foster a deeper understanding of the urgency of the issue, highlight progress and gaps, as well as opportunities for implementing gender-responsive disaster management at all levels, from global frameworks to local communities. Second, we want to gain actionable insights and strategies for overcoming barriers by sharing best practices, success stories, and challenges faced in implementation. The exchange of lessons learned will help us identify practical solutions, avoid common pitfalls, and develop more effective approaches moving forward. Third, we want to emphasize the importance of capacity building in equipping stakeholders with the skills to effectively integrate gender into disaster risk management, and the role of advocacy in influencing policies to ensure that gender is prioritized in disaster planning, response, and recovery. Lastly, we aim to inspire collective action, strengthen partnerships, and identify opportunities for collaboration among governments, organizations, and communities, working together to create more effective and inclusive disaster management solutions. Thank you once again for your commitment to this important event. Let's make the most of today's sessions and continue to learn from each other. Here's to another productive and insightful day. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And let's get started. Today's session will be moderated by Mary Picard. I think you all know her very well by now, and she will ably guide us through this morning's presentations and discussions. Over to you, Mary.
Thank you, Madhavi. So this morning's session is about practice and policy on integrating gender in disaster risk management. So this is a continuation of where we were at yesterday with some different kinds of inputs. So we will have 2 speakers before their morning tea break and then 3 speakers afterwards. And we will have a general discussion session at the end. So if you have particular questions that you would really like to ask, remember to note them down so that you can include them in the final session. So now I think we will bring at least the first 2 speakers around the front, Veronica Cedillos and Fahmida Khatun. So Veronica, would you like to come around? Thank you. Okay, so we're going to start with Veronica and then Fahmida, and then we'll have the morning tea break. So Veronica is President and CEO of GeoHazards International, a small global non-profit with the mission to save lives by empowering at-risk communities worldwide to build resilience ahead of disasters and climate impacts. She's responsible for the strategic and financial management of the organisation, including headquarters in California and field offices in India, Nepal, Bhutan, Haiti, and the Dominican Republic. So that's quite extensive. So Veronica is a structural and earthquake engineer by training, whose professional experience is focused on the reduction of impacts from natural hazards. And she has extensive experience in managing international projects in this area. So if you want to look a little bit more, you can see more details of her work in the profiles document. So thank you, Veronica. I will give you 15 minutes, as you know. We'll have to be a bit strict on the time. So thank you. Please go ahead.
Thank you so much. Should I go ahead and stand up here? All right. Thank you so much, Mary, for that nice introduction. And thank you again to ADB and to NUS for hosting us. It's really a pleasure and an honor for me to be here with you today and to share a little bit more about our work, but also to learn from all of you. I feel like I learned so much from different perspectives yesterday, and I'm really looking forward to hearing the rest of the presentations today. So my approach today is to talk to you about very practical strategies that we take to integrate women into our work. We're a pretty small organization, as you'll see, so we try to be resourceful and think about creative ways of engaging women. I'll also point out why it's really important for our mission. It's not just about inclusion, but actually being a lot more effective in carrying out our work. So I want to start off by telling you the story of Dansara. This is a woman mason who took part in our training program on earthquake-resistant construction. She is in Western Nepal. She, along with other female masons, took part in our program. And this is quite rare, right? So we had to make an exerted effort to make sure to include women in this work. A subset of the trained masons, including Dansara, went on to construct a model earthquake-resistant school building in their community. And this was very personal for Dansara. Her children attend school here, as it was for other masons. And so they deeply understood the importance of replicating the new skills they learned into other ongoing construction. One of the really important things to note here is that including women is actually really important in this part of in this region, because if we want to have lasting impact, it's important that we include them. Dansara's community, it's very typical for men to go elsewhere and work and send money back home. And actually, by providing them training, it incentivizes them to leave, because they are now with these new skills, this new experience, it's more likely that they can get a job elsewhere. So if we want to have lasting impact, it's critical that we include women. so that these skills continue to benefit the community long term. So before I jump in with other specific examples, I want to tell you a little bit more about GeoHazards International, our work and our approach. Excuse me. So GeoHazards International, GHI, we're a global nonprofit founded in 1991 with headquarters in California. Our mission is to save lives, and by emphasizing saving lives, that means that we're working in some of the most vulnerable places in the world. And we work by empowering at-risk communities to build resilience. This means that we're emphasizing equipping local leaders, local professionals with the skills and the tools that they need to build resilience in their own communities. And we work ahead of disasters and climate impacts. So we're not typically doing post-disaster work. We're trying to identify in the world, okay, where is there a high disaster fatality risk? And how do we work there in advance to help protect communities before a disaster occurs? We've worked in over 25 low to middle income countries in the world, and we currently have offices, as was mentioned, and people in Haiti, Dominican Republic, Nepal, Bhutan, India, and just about a year and a half ago, we initiated a program in the Philippines. We're a small organization, about $1.8 million in annual revenue. We're only about 20 people across the globe, but we expand our team with partnering with local experts as needed for any one initiative or project. And we work on earthquakes, landslides, tsunamis, and climate. So we think about disaster resilience as an ongoing journey. It's not a one-time effort. So of course, the first step is to understand the risk. And we typically do this through disaster scenarios because this is a more tangible way for local leaders, local professionals to understand their particular risks. Once we have that, we work together with them to co-develop solutions that take into account what's feasible locally. How can we tap into local strengths or local ongoing plan updates, things like this. And then because we work in pre-disaster work, it's really important for us to think a lot about our communication. Because people may not be aware of their risk or might not be thinking about it, they haven't had a big disaster happen yet. So this aspect of communication is really important for us. So we do a lot of work actually with social scientists to try to figure out how do we think about behavioral change and how do we communicate in a way that's effective. But ultimately, we're trying to inspire locally led action because we know that disaster resilience is an ongoing thing. It requires years, decades, and decades of ongoing efforts. And for this reason, we emphasize strengthening local capacities all along the way, whether it's on the understanding risk side, the developing solutions, sharing knowledge. So now to give another specific example, as I mentioned in the example in Nepal, it's engaging women in technical trainings where they're often left out. It's really important from the perspective of lasting impact, but it's also really important from the perspective of reaching a broader portion of the population. In many cultures, there's often limited dialogue between men and women outside of the family. So if we only are doing technical trainings for men, then we're missing out on almost half the population. They're not getting access to this information. They're not sharing it. Women, just like men, have their networks. And so by ensuring that we're engaging women in these technical trainings, we're making sure that our information is much more widespread. So this example you see here is the first time women were engaged in a technical program that we held in a village in the Andes in Peru. So in order to develop targeted interventions, we need to understand the particular local risk issues, and in particular, the barriers. So one of the things that we do is that we make sure to go to where women are. As it has been mentioned, as we all know, it is very typical for women to be the main caregivers. They have a lot of responsibilities at home. So if we don't make an effort to go to them, we might miss a lot of these risk barriers. So we might find, for example, that rapid evacuation is just not possible because of caregiving responsibilities. So understanding these barriers in advance and developing strategies that take this into account is not only protecting the women, but the people they care for, their children, the elderly, people with special needs. And we have seen this aspect of gender roles play a very big factor in past disaster fatality rates. A poignant example is of the 2005 Kashmir earthquake, where a disproportionate number of women and children perished in their collapsed homes. They could have easily exited their small, vulnerable homes, but they didn't think of this quick reaction because it's not typical for women to leave the house without being in company of a family male member. Had this been identified beforehand and the community come together to think of, okay, what's an acceptable reaction that would be that would make sense for our community, that could have saved thousands and thousands of lives. On the flip side, one of the things that we have found in some communities is that women have a lot of untapped strengths. In some places, women actually have a lot of decision-making power and agency in terms of how they manage their household and family. So by making sure that they are aware of their risk, we're better equipping them to protect their families and by extension, the broader community. So they're making decisions around deciding and communicating to their family, where are we gonna need if there's, where are we gonna evacuate to if there's an emergency? How do I tap into the different resources in my community? Who do I connect with? They're the ones really thinking about all this. So it's very important for us to be able to equip them with this, with knowledge and actionable information that they could take forth to protect their families. Another strategy we use is partnering with local women's organizations. They bring in insights about how to effectively engage women and insights that we might not otherwise know. So to give you a particular example, this is of our work in Peru. And I briefly mentioned we did some technical training, but one of the things that the partner organization told us was that we should make our program much more holistic. So not just focus on the technical part, because then we were not going to get a lot of the women to join. They would think it's not their role to be involved in that type of training. They recommended that we also talk about other topics that were integrated into disaster risk reduction. So let me explain. The two topics they recommended was housing rights and land titles, because by having a formal land title, it makes families eligible to tap into resources at the national level that will help improve their houses, that would help strengthen their houses, and also post-disaster. So to get money for repair or reconstruction. So this is a big issue in Peru and in other parts of the world, where by not having the formal land title, they cannot access these funds. And so bringing in these other topics, we brought in a larger portion of the population in this village to come and to be interested in the work. We all know that risk information can be quite technical and not accessible. So as I was mentioning, communication is a big part of what we think of and what we try to do in a way that's effective. And one of the ways that we do this is talking about communicating risk through stories and familiar contexts. So the example you see here is of a graphic novel that takes place in Shaanxi, China. And it features a grandmother with her two grandchildren while their parents are working in distant cities. And this is a very typical setup in this family arrangement in this part of the world. And so by these characters going through an earthquake event, it reveals particular risk issues for any one group or another. And this is an easier way to try to communicate to people what they may need to be thinking about for particular groups. And we also do a lot of work around empowering the future generation, equipping them with life-saving skills. And one interesting story on this, this is my colleague who's running a fire safety training in Bhutan, and this is at a school, and it was done for both boys and girls. And one of the things that was interesting is that he noted that the girls were actually very hesitant to learn how to use a fire extinguisher. They felt like this is something that only boys and men do. But as we trained them, they got more comfortable, they gained confidence, and then they felt empowered to protect themselves and their peers. And this is really important in this setting because there's school dormitories and there's two separate buildings. One is for boys and one is for girls. So had the girls not learned how to use a fire extinguisher, they would have had a much higher fire risk for future events. And last, we also think about youth as powerful advocates. Youth are the future of their community. And so we are always thinking about creative ways of engaging them, creating local youth action teams, having them communicate what they learned through art, through slam poetries, in the Philippines, there was a youth group that was created on trying to raise awareness of the importance of mangroves. They did a mangrove selfie campaign. So there's a lot of really interesting ways to engage them. And this is really powerful because youth have a lot of influence over their peers, but also engaging them in this very creative way means that this is information that they're going to retain for the rest of their lives. And so as being the future of their community and thinking about disaster resilience as an ongoing journey, it's really important that we're thinking for the future as well. So just to recap, equipping women leads to long-lasting impact. In many places in the world, they tend to stay in their community. So this is really important that we're engaging them. Engaging women can benefit entire families and the broader communities. They're often in charge of their family. They're the ones that are the main caregivers. So equipping them really helps overall. We need to think about how risk exposure differs with gender roles, and this needs to be identified pre-disaster so that we can develop interventions that take this into account. As we saw with the example, and I mentioned that the example in Kashmir, and also some of the going out to where women are to get to better understand how their roles play a key, how their roles can mean that their risk exposure is higher. Also, as has been mentioning over and over, that collecting and analyzing data by gender helps to inform targeted strategies and programs. We're always looking for this type of information. We're trying to follow research, is trying to understand, okay, what do we know about gender and how do we better target or design our efforts so that we can have more, our work can be more effective. Partnering with local women's organization, again, they can bring in wisdom or insights that we would otherwise miss. They understand the barriers and also the opportunities and topics that are of relevance to women locally. Empowering youth, including girls, because they're the future of the community. And lastly, I think there's a lot of emphasis on women's vulnerability, and that's really important. But I also think we need to think more about the untapped strengths. There's a lot of insights, ideas that women can bring forth, that it's about strengthening the resilience overall for a whole community. So with that, I will leave you with one last slide. That's kind of on that same topic of just noting and stressing again, you know, we know past disasters have shown that women and girls are often disproportionately affected. But if we equip women, if we engage them, empowered women can make all the difference. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Veronica. That was, apart from being excellent timing, I found that really interesting because of the way you have taken a very localised approach in each case and really communicated with women in their organisations and in their local communities, and gave them or helped them develop their skills for reducing risk. So I think that's a really practical local approach, and it's really good to see. So thank you very much. I would now like to introduce Fahmida Khatun. So Fahmida is the Executive Director at the Centre for Policy Dialogue, a leading think tank in Bangladesh. She's also a non-resident senior fellow at the Atlantic Council, USA. Dr. Khatun is a board director of the Central Bank of Bangladesh and a member of the task force on re-strategizing the economy and mobilising resources for equitable and sustainable development formed by the current interim government of Bangladesh. She's also a member of the BRAC board. You'll have to tell me what that means in a minute. The largest non-governmental organisation in the world. And Dr. Khatun is also a member of the high-level advisory board of the Productive Capacities in Index of UNCTAD. So there's a little more information about your background, and please look at it's very very impressive. So thank you. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mary. Good morning, everyone. I think after this excellent presentation at the micro level and really at the grassroots level, my presentation will be a little bit different. We look at issues from the macro policy point of view. And the Center for Policy Dialogue, which is a think tank, rather than a do tank, actually. So we work at the policy level, and mostly we have economists on board. So that's why we try to influence the policies, and whatever sectoral issues we deal with, we look at from the macro policy aspect. So how the macroeconomic policies can be influenced at the policy level, high policy level. That's our approach. And while doing so, we have three-pronged approaches. So one is the knowledge generation, evidence-based. We collect information both from the field level and also from the desk level, whatever is available from the government sources. And secondly, to advocate policies, make policies, policy influencing efforts so that there are differences in the policy-making process. And also the other objective is to bridge the gap between the policymakers and the people, particularly those who do not have an access to the policy-making process, but policies are made for them, and they do not have a voice in the policy-making process. So what we do, that one of the important ways to connect them is to organize dialogues where we invite the broader stakeholders, including the policymakers, the non-government organizations, members from the private sector, experts, the media. In fact, media is a strategic partner. If you want to really get your message across the board, then media can play a very important role. And then, of course, publication and dissemination, and also build the capacity through this. So we work on these three-pronged approaches. And mostly, as I said, that we look at issues from the macro point of view. We have we work on a lot on the climate issues, not so much on disaster, but disaster is part of the broader climate issues. So I'll just start with giving some information, which may be a little bit repetitive, because yesterday we heard a very good presentation from one of our government official. He really dealt with the policies which were there, and he described how the policies are being implemented at the policy level. So just to, okay, right. Just to tap some of the information. So Bangladesh is, as you know, that one of the important countries which is a vulnerable country to the impact of climate change. And if you look at the numbers in economic terms, that over the years, how the economic losses have multiplied. So during 2009 and 2014, whatever number is that, it has multiplied by almost 10 times during 2015 and 20. And however, though there is a huge implications in terms of losses, economic and social losses also. Sometimes, social losses cannot be monetized, cannot be quantified, but, the economic loss in itself is so huge. But the issue is that there are gaps in terms of, addressing the gender issues. In the previous presentation, we have heard that how women can be integrated, and they can play a very important role in terms of addressing the impact of climate change. But we still have a gap in terms of addressing the issues of gender inequality. The other issue, other challenge, is that the disaggregated data. Data is a very real problem, real and present problem in case of gender-specific climate analysis. So that's why if you do not have disaggregated data, if you do not have the real-time data, then it is very difficult to have practical policy. So that's why it is not only in case of gender data, gender-related data, but also other data. So without real and disaggregated data, it is policies often do not reflect the real policy making. So that makes it very difficult for the policymakers also to make really appropriate policy changes. So I'll just So some of the issues I'll highlight. I will not go by by the problems. You all know this is also relevant for other countries. So one is that there is significant gaps in early warning dissemination, and particularly in case of women, which women and girls are affected, and the evacuation decisions which are taken by mostly men. So it causes sometimes delays for the women and girls. and also women have particular physical problems, physical issues, not problems. So for example, pregnant women or persons with disabilities, or those who are not well, and the elderly, they face difficulties when there is decisions to evacuate places. And often cyclone and flood shelters, they face electricity disruption, which is a cause of concern, particularly for the female members, because they feel insecure, and women are also sometimes reluctant to leave their homes because these are their roots. So they do, and also because of the insecurity and privacy concerns. In addition to that, wash and sanitation facilities are in a poor state in most cases, and the relief packages usually do not include feminine hygiene products. And so, as we know that, I just mentioned about the disproportionate implications on the women, and the gender-based violence is usually increased following any natural disaster. Then there is also the food shortages. When there is food shortages, as you know, that women are the last ones to have food, and this risks the issue of malnutrition and the related health complications. And as I've just mentioned, that access to reproductive health services that gets disrupted, and which affects women. And also the social stigma regarding sexual and reproductive health products, that also is an issue, and that remains sometimes unattended. So damages to sanitation facilities, so that disrupts again, and also the lack of drinking water and other facilities that leads to waterborne diseases. So these are some of the important disaster management policies which you have also heard yesterday, so I'll not deal with that, but these are very important ones. National Plan for Disaster Management, Bangladesh Climate Change and Gender Action Plan, Climate Prosperity Plan, Perspective Plan, 8th Five-Year Plan, Bangladesh Data Plan, Bangladesh Climate Change Strategy and Action Plan, National Adaptation Plan of Action, Disaster Management Act. And all these have some issues which are surrounded gender and women's welfare, and all these, as you can see, that I will not go line by line, but they also advocate for inclusion of gender responsive strategies in disaster preparedness, and they emphasize that disaster risk management needs to be inclusive and to ensure in the integration of gender issues. So I would say that on the whole, these policies have a focus, but there are some limitations, and there are also this Bangladesh Delta Plan, for example, that also offers some gender issues, but not significantly not adequate. So let me just go to the issue of how the Center for Policy Dialogue works on disaster management issues. As I have mentioned, that our work is on three broad legs, and one of the important ones is that awareness building through dialogues with relevant stakeholders, both at the not only at the national level but also at the sub-national level. So we work with many organizations at the grassroots level, at the at the district and sub-district levels, and several organizations who are working at the community level. We work also with them in terms of collecting information, and also in terms of disseminating. Sometimes when you go outside the capital, they are our collaborators who are in charge of organizing various dialogues and discussions where the people from the grassroots level participate and they discuss their own problems. And as I said, that media is a strategic partner, and media briefings are a very important component of our activities to disseminate information to the general public. And and there are some numbers how these are widely disseminated. The other work I have already mentioned about the knowledge generation, dissemination, and outreach, and policy influencing and advocacy. And in fact, Bangladesh is a flood-prone country, and we had, after a few years, 5 years, or after some, 10 years, we have severe floods. So we had assessed the damages in monetary terms in 2007, 2004, 2017, 2020, and the latest one, 2024. Last year, we had another severe flood. So on the basis of economic damages, we made specific recommendations after the disasters. And in fact, we had collected data from the Ministry of Disaster Management. And we also conducted field visits. So our researchers went to the areas and collected information from those people who were affected through in-depth interview. And there, we took help of the local non-government organizations who were involved in providing support, and also the publication. So this is the one specific example of last year, how we had generated information and how we had estimated the damages. So some of the examples where the civil society organizations are working in Bangladesh. So I thought, though we work in a different manner in different areas, but these are the organizations, non-government organizations, which are working at the grassroots levels to deal with the disaster management issues. In fact, BRAC, that is the BRAC, as I have just heard, that one of the largest non-government organizations, they have worked at the grassroots level. Really, they have their scale is very large, and they provide training to women also for disaster preparedness, livelihood support, gender inclusive community resilience programs, and advocacy for gender responsive policies. There is this Jago Nari Coast Trust, Action Aid, Bangladesh, Oxfam in Bangladesh. They also work in relief distribution as well, and some other organizations. They work on capacity building for women and also disaster risk reduction programs. So one of the important reasons for mentioning this, that not only they work at the grassroots levels to improve the capacity, but we also have collaborations with many of them when we conduct our research. So what more can be done by the civil society organizations? One important one is that development partners and larger NGOs, they can support the grassroots organizations which are already working, but there is a need for scaling up. And the other one is that knowledge sharing that should be enhanced, and the civil society organizations can replicate from each other's practices. They can collaborate and to strengthen their work. And although the government disaster management plans and policies, they include some specific gender integration measures, as I have shown you earlier, the civil society organizations can play an important role in terms of monitoring and implementation. This is one of the important work to improve the quality of services, government services. And in fact, when we go to the local levels, we work with the local administration as well, and they provide a lot of support in terms of providing data and also taking us around. So in fact, we also work at the national level in terms of going specifically beyond the dialogues, public dialogues. We have consultation meetings with the parliamentary committees on various sectors, including the climate change ones and also women's affairs, and also specific discussions with specific ministries, particularly with the climate change ministry. The other one is that CSOs should continue to engage with the government, both at the local and ministerial level, and to advocate for women's issues. and one of the last points I want to re-emphasize, which I started with, is the availability of data, disaggregated and real-time data. So I think non-government, we can generate, we have also from time to time surveys, but we can do so much because we have limitations both in terms of financial and human resources. So government data is very crucial for conducting any policy relevant research and policy advocacy. With this, I would like to end. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Fahmida. So we've had the contrast between the micro level and the higher policy level role of civil societies. And I think it's really important to remember that we need action at all of those levels. And so I thought it was very interesting what you were talking about, the role of civil society in monitoring what people sometimes think of as a government role, but really it's a whole of society role. So it's really important to have that kind of very active civil society organisations in spreading information and capacity and monitoring, external monitoring of government. So thank you very much for that. So now we will move on to, we're going to have another photo. So I think everyone will come up the front and then we'll have morning tea and then we will continue this session afterwards. Thank you very much. Humanitarian and Disaster Risk Reduction Platform in Nepal. Krishna holds 2 master's degrees, one in geography from Tribhuvan University in Nepal and another in international environmental science from Lund University, Sweden. She's a highly regarded professional in the fields of disaster risk reduction, humanitarian response and climate action and local governance. So she has extensive experience working across Nepal, Bangladesh and also Yemen. And she's held key positions in many international organisations, as well as being a founding member of the Women Humanitarian Disaster Risk Reduction Platform in Nepal, which promotes women's leadership in disaster risk reduction. There's more information about Krishna's background in the bio notes that you've received. So please read those because it's very interesting. But I will now hand over to you, Krishna, to make your presentation. Thank you.
So can I go there? Okay. Good morning and namaste. So here I'm going to share about our work. It's not an organization, it's just loose platform of women professionals. And then mainly today I will mainly focus on the how we work during the earthquake response, which was supported by UN Women. But along with that, I will little bit share our what is the WSDRRP. So the context is likewise the Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and others. It's not more difference than other, Nepal also the similar to other, but in terms of gender equality, gender inequality still is we are still far behind than the Sri Lanka and Bangladesh. So because of that and the different kind of barriers, women are not still in the leading position in DRRM sectors. So, and at the same time, we have limited women professionals working in DRR and humanitarian sectors, though we have more than 40% women representatives at the local level. But when we talk about the DRR capacity, understanding, and knowledge is still limited. So, but we have very comprehensive act, policies, strategies, and many framework and guidelines which emphasizes the equality of gender and inclusion and also highlights the women's leadership in DRM. But still the gaps in practice and implementation. We have very good policies planned, but implementation is still gaps. So having such policies and strategies, is it enough? However, their women's leadership is still questionable. So to respond to address these questions, we established Women Humanitarian DRR platform in 2019 with the aim for promoting women leadership in DRM and climate actions and their meaningful participation in decision-making role. So currently, where more than 150 women are associated with this loose network and expanded this network in up to the 3 provinces level, 3 out of 7. So we are working in 3 provinces now. So we are working basically in 4 areas in the platform. So first area is capacity building and leadership development. So we have been providing training for some lead women professionals and cascading that knowledge to the local level so that we don't need to go every time at the local level to train more people. So that way we are cascading our knowledge. And another is area like my colleague, friend Veronica and Dr. from Bangladesh, she shares like women's participation, like some of the work, like humanitarian work, missions, and search and rescues. Such kind of works are considered as a men-dominated work. Women cannot do that kind of thinking. We have still existence in our society, our community. So we try to like break that stereotype of thinking and providing training to women for the fire response, women missions, developing women missions, and the search and rescue on the earthquake and CSSR, which is very difficult, and also the fire response. So, and then how we are working to build the capacity. We are not working silo. We are working with different organizations. If any organization is going to organize any kind of training, we are reaching with them and convincing to bring more women participants. And even sometimes we are recommending our members to incorporate those trainings. So this way we are enhancing our knowledge and capacity. The second area is generation of evidence. For that we are doing research. During the different type of disasters, it's a year round we have a disaster, except tsunami and volcano. We have all type of hazard. It's a multi-hazard prone country, and we are facing the disaster every time. So during the disasters like flood, earthquake, or any kind of disasters, so we conducted like at least once a year we are doing the research and to see how the response, emergency response is, whether it is inclusive and effectiveness to address the needs of most vulnerable group or not. So bringing that issues through the research work. And we are also not only the issue of most vulnerable groups, we have also conducted the research and also conducted series of webinars and discussions with women professionals. Especially during the COVID, we did many research and conducted the webinars with the local government, women representatives and professionals to bring their what kind of issues, challenges, barriers they are facing. Because everybody is talking about the most vulnerable group, but no one talking about the women responders, what kind of challenges and issues they are facing. So we also collected those kind of information. Then what we knew during the COVID was not only the barrier and challenges for them, it was also the opportunity for them to learn the technology. Because before the COVID, the women representative, most of them, they were not able to use the Zoom meeting and not using the laptop and any internet access. So it was also an opportunity for them during the COVID. Our third area is a policy advocacy. So we have been providing our support to the government while developing the different policies, laws, and framework guidelines to ensure the gender inclusion in JC, not only the gender, JC inclusion in such kind of policy documents. And also as I mentioned in the context, still there is a institutional women's representation is gap in the institutional arrangement. For that, we have been continuously doing advocacy work, and somehow we are success at the lower level, at the local level, but still there is a gap at the higher level. It's a federal and provincial level still, though it is provision in the policies and legal documents, but in the practice still there is a gap of women's participation. Then we are also doing advocacy for the most vulnerable groups. We have been raising if there is some gaps on the during the emergency or recovery phase, we are raising their issues, not only the vulnerable groups, also the professionals. Especially during the COVID time, there was an order came from the government, like even in the COVID time, even the women health professional, if they are pregnant or they have a small baby, they have to work, they have to join the office. So against that order, we submitted the petition to government and different organizations. So it worked out. So our last area, fourth area is humanitarian response. So during the emergency, we also jumped in the field just to set the example, not like it's a loose network, loose platform. We cannot do everything. Just setting the example how response can be inclusive. So this time I'm going to share about the example of COVID earthquake response. In the last year, we had a big earthquake in Western Nepal. We call Jajarkot earthquake. So thanks, UN Women. So with their support, we jumped to the earthquake affected area for the gender inclusive response. So as we all know, there is always a disaggregated data gaps. So we collected the disaggregated data from the community, mobilizing local women volunteers. Then we address their, based on their need, we had some emergency response. More than 500 people we distributed relief materials as per the need. During the response, not only we have been providing the support, we have been also doing the advocacy work, especially like awareness raising materials. So we have an issue of caste-based discrimination. We have issue on the gender-based violence. We have a different kind of sexual and sexual exploitation and many kind of social bad practices we have still. So to address that malpractices at the community, to maintain the social harmony, to treat equal behavior to the all community members. So we mobilize the trained women. We train some of the women, young women volunteers at the community. So then after that, after the training, we mobilize them to the community to discuss with the community about the untouchability issues, about the issue of gender-based violence. So this work has been continuously going throughout our response period, not only the relief distribution even. So third work during the earthquake, we conducted the women-led community kitchen, especially like when disaster occurs, we used to provide the cooked meal right after the disasters. But we implemented 3 weeks later that community-led kitchen because we wanted to set the example like women are not only the survivor or recipient, they can also lead during the time of disaster. So with the aim of in that particular area, mostly men are migrated for the work in the India or other country, and women have to take care of their families and household. So even the temporary shelters, there is no people. Very limited men are available at the ground level, community level. So they have to construct the house. So if we provide cooked food. So it's helpful for them to or go to construct their temporary shelter, as well as also like women are working inside the house. They are not, some of the women are not able to go out from their home. So it's opportunity for, it created opportunity for them to go out from their home to work also to for their livelihood. And also it's like a women's work are not considered, it's unpaid care. They are cooking, feeding their families, elderly, children, and working in the farm but without any paid. But we, for this purpose, we selected the 7 dynamics low untouchable low or Dalit caste community. We train them to maintain the hygiene and everything, and cook the feed the people, about the 500 people for a month. So now, because of that learning, they can lead the emergency response in the future. So that way we work in the emergency preparedness. So our learning is, partnership is, and collaboration is very important for the policy advocacy and capacity building. And humanitarian work and leadership is always considered as a men dominated work, but we challenge them. Women also can be a good humanitarian worker and risk reduction, building resilient workers. And capacity building and policy advocacy is a continuous process. One sort of advocacy, one sort of capacity building is not enough. We need to continue for that. And realization of the disaggregated data is also another area at the local government level. And mostly the women's network organizations platform have a limited access on the resources. So they have been facing challenges to run their programs. And general, especially during the research, it came out from the local government women representative. That's a local government. Most of the local government, they are not willing for the gender responsive budget allocation in the DRM. That's also another challenge we found. The women's representation in the DRM governance is still like a matter of political willingness, not the others. And then that's regional and international collaboration is very important. Like thanks ADB for providing us to share our knowledge and experience in such a platform. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Krishna. I've heard you speak about this network before, and I'm always deeply impressed by the long time that you've continued with these activities and built them, and the women's empowerment being at the core of it, women's empowerment and skill building. So it's really good to see how many different activities you're doing and the successes that you've had, and long may you continue. Thank you very much. I will now introduce Ramona Miranda from Sri Lanka, who is also a leader in the regional organisation, civil society organisation, Duryog Nivaran. So Ramona is a development communication specialist with a keen interest and involvement in participatory development approaches, with more than 20 years experience in South Asia, working in civil society organisations as well as some international organisations. And she holds a Master of Arts in Communication from the Ohio State University. And she doesn't want me to talk too much about her. So here we go. Thank you very much, Ramona. Please go ahead with your presentation.
Okay, thank you so much, Mary. And thanks to Madhavi and the ADB team for the invitation. So what I'm going to be talking about is about disaster risk governance and looking at the inclusion aspect in that. I'm doing so from 2 angles. One is part of Duryog Nivaran, which is a network of South Asian network of organizations. So actually it's the organizations within the network that carries out. And then I'll also touch a little later on the work that we kind of do at a regional level from the gender stakeholder group in the region. Okay, so why does risk governance need to be socially relevant? to this audience. I don't not need to explain any of that, but I'm just having a few slides up there. And it's priority 2 of the Sendai framework. It's the system of institutions, mechanisms, policy and legal frameworks, and basically that oversee the whole DRR and related areas of policy. So why inclusion in risk governance? We've talked about it quite a bit. We know that they're deep-rooted in the socio-economic vulnerabilities, the perception of risk, that we prepare and respond to crisis situation, and the experiences, the needs and capacities of people feeling and dealing with risk needs to be reflected in the policies and in the practice that's going on. So obviously communities at risk need to be involved. Their knowledge and their lived experience often doesn't get factored in. So which means the DRRM efforts resulting also are less effective. So as a result, it's very important that the governance systems, which are both policies, institutions, practice, structures, a whole gamut. Okay, so again, so that is inclusion generally. Gender gap, we've talked about it, so I won't go into all these details. But when we look at gender and the whole aspect of intersectionality, so there are so many groups that are socially, economically, culturally, politically vulnerable. The women and the children, ethnic, linguistic groups, people with special needs, migrants, gender and sexual minorities, youth, older people, and across all of this, gender is a cross-cutting thing across all of that. So which is why when we are looking at the whole aspect of gender, we don't have any choice but to look at the whole intersectional aspect. So it's not often it's, we sometimes say gender and whatever, but it's the whole, when you talk about gender, you cannot consider the intersectionality. So I think women's representation in governance needs to be viewed at all levels, and with disaster risk governance requiring this even more so. So at planning and decision-making level, at the institution, at professional and practitioners, as women leaders, as citizens, as community leaders, so all of that. Okay, so the expectation of risk governance as a mechanism for reducing vulnerability, engaging all groups and looking at the concerns of the most vulnerable, leading to strengthening resilience. That's what we're trying to kind of achieve. So what are the challenges for this? So some of the challenges that I've listed, I mean, there are many, many challenges. But just looking at a few, the acceptance of the relevance. There's a lack of acceptance that it is relevant to include, gender concerns. The competition for limited slots when it comes to leadership. So always might and power wins out. The barriers are being many, the socio-cultural, citing tradition, practice, attitudes. So it's very easy sometimes to fall back on, this is what we do traditionally, this is what is accepted. We do need to respect all of that, but there's also certain things that need changing. And then patriarchy reflected in policies, structures, representation, leadership, across all of that. So also that not thinking in terms of resource allocations. So we are talking about gender responsive budgeting. The lack of ability to contribute, so which is why we are talking in terms of the capacity buildings, but also the lack of space to contribute. A lot of the time, even if we do capacitate, or, even if we build capacity of people, the space is not available. So it's creating those spaces that become kind of important. So yeah, so this is sort of a framework of sort of something that we've talked about as in Duryog Nivaran in recently that we've talked about in how do you include gender, or how do you have gender inclusive risk governance. So the conditions needed, we feel, are the readiness of the governance institutes and of the community organizations, the readiness to actually take these on board. The second thing is the fact that we need to remove the barriers that are limiting women in public roles, and then the acceptance of women's role in governance institutes. So it's one is the readiness and then the acceptance, and then of course removing the barriers in between. Not rocket science, all of you know this, but just putting it together and trying to see whether we can, address each of these. I'm going to take the case study of something that we did in Trincomalee. And this is kind of drawn out of Trincomalee in Sri Lanka, by the way. So there was a project talking about revitalizing the disaster risk management process at the local level. This was in the new normal. This was just immediately post-COVID. Two sort of more urban type of Grama Niladari divisions, which is our lowest level of administration, both flood-prone communities in the urban fringes of the Trincomalee town. And then there was also the more rural, drought-prone rural area. So we sort of worked with these three communities. And so, of course, we did the usual project process. You go talk to all the leaders. We made sure we informed the national level, but more it was working at the provincial and the local and the divisional levels, talking to them about all the the DES. There is, I think, Major General Herat yesterday talked about the the decentralized disaster management, those risk committees that are there, right? To a certain level, they function, but when you get to the local levels, in a lot of places, they don't. So we did actually work with the National Disaster Relief Service Officer. We talked with, all these structures that exist in that sort of divisional, the district and divisional level. And then once we've done that, then we went down to the sort of community and found that we carried out assessment in talking to all that. A lot of these villages do not have active disaster management committees. These were set up and were very active. These were set up post tsunami. They were very active, and they do get active at various moments in time, mostly, after disasters. But at the village level, we found that in the places that we were working, they were not very active, although it's there on paper, it's there, it can be mobilized. And that's what we try to do. Use what was there, use the existing things. So we use that. But there were one or two places, especially in the urban sort of communities, then you need to sort of bring together these communities. So there are no regular meetings that are held between these stakeholders and the Grama Niladari. There are no regular planned activities, and they really fall outside of the DRR plan. So though it's sort of there, they kind of fall outside the plan. So, sorry. Yeah. So what did we do? So like I said, developing awareness towards getting the readiness of the Governance Institute and the community organizations. We developed awareness on what is needed is on gender-based vulnerability and capacities and the roles and skills, as well as support the community. So the plans existed like at different stages, a long time ago, like 5 years ago, they've developed a plan. In some places, no plan. So then sitting with them, working out the plan, working with the community, getting the Grama Niladari also involved. And we first carried that out. And then carrying this awareness on the gender-based vulnerabilities, but also more so on capacities, yeah. and importance of considering these aspects at the divisional level meetings, highlighting the need to collect the data and analyze it. Yeah, as well as engaging all the local community structures and then made sure that women took a leadership. So this measure, the roles, the skills, the capacity in planning and decision making was highlighted. So it was more like through practice, there was a certain amount of awareness creation, but actually showing it in practice that women can do the job. The removal of barriers, So in terms of women taking the leadership and planning, in two of the areas, the women took the leadership. Not that it started off that way. It started in one of those that the RDS, the Rural Development Society, which is male dominated, started it, but they couldn't actually continue. So the Women's Rural Development Society had to kind of take it over. In Gomara Kadavala, of course, but the project was about to do with a school. They developed the whole plan for the village, and then they picked one particular activity that they would of that plan, the overall plan, that would, we were able to support them to kind of work on. So the activity they picked in that particular area was to do with supporting, enhancing the school learning capacities. So that basically the teachers took a lead role. So the women's organizations didn't have much of a role to play, but in the other two, that happened. So we made an effort not to make it a gender project. You may question that, but to portray it as a DRR project, linking into the issues that community faced, and based on the mobilization methods used to bring out the roles that women could play. So when you pitch it as a gender project, only the women come out, or it's sometimes a little less effective. I don't know. So we made sure we don't pitch it as such. Like I said, in this particular community, the Women's Rural Development Society took over when another community could not, and it involved a lot of construction work. And these women managed it. Like we saw that, not that they can't manage it, but of course they drew on the technical expertise. They went and got the technical officer from the local government and got that support in all of that. Yeah, so other examples of some of the work we do is like using a 4-module training like at the Gender Stakeholder Group. We've developed a training program and we started rolling that out, supporting the implementation of the Gender Action Plan, developing various tools. One of the things that I kept finding yesterday that we talked about was about collecting disaggregated data. I think sometimes it's good to put the cart before the horse and to talk about the analysis. It's only when people know why that data is useful and you can show that it's useful that they'll go back and collect that. So, but you could say, well, without the data, you can't do the analysis. But, I think it's very important to put the emphasis, and that's perhaps one of the tools that we're thinking of developing. In a project that's up, we have just started, we're planning to work in 5 locations over the next 3 years. And this will include gender responsive DRR training for local government and national, and monitoring. This is where I just put these down because I thought some of you can come in to help with this aspect. Monitoring the number of women and intersectional groups that are improving in the governance structures. Women's representation in the managerial roles in the community. And track the integration of analysis and gender responsive budgeting in systems in these project locations. So this is perhaps some of the things that we done. In addition, I'd also like to say some things that we've done is the whole aspect of networking. She spoke, I know my time is almost up, networking, the importance of networking. You explained a network in Nepal. I think yesterday we had a explanation of another network. And I think that's very important because in networks, so one of the things that we are plugging now is trying to actually advocate on the role of networks. Role of networks within the region, but also even things like the gender stakeholder group that we use for DRR in the region, how you can bring the collective strengths of everybody and use that. Because you can collect the tools within those networks. We are collecting the tools that are available. So yesterday I started noting down so many things that I heard, which will also go into that file, which will say, give people here to support your implementation of the Sendai gap here. There are so many tools. And carving out spaces at the regional level. Yeah, I know, I'm done. Just I'll finish with that, to make sure that we carve out spaces to give the messages that we need to give. Thanks. So,
Thank you very much, Ramona. That was a really good example of where you're working at regional level and also at national level down to local. And I was very interested in you talking about promoting disaster risk management in the community and mainstreaming the gender elements into it, because yes, I think all of us who've worked in the gender and disaster risk management area have encountered that situation where it's called a gender project and only the women turn up. So that sounds like a really good strategy to me, as well as the very concrete capacity development and long-term resilience building in the community. So was really good to hear about that. Now, just before I introduce Zonibel, I want to mention that for people online, during the Q&A session at the end of this panel, there will be an opportunity for you also to have your questions answered. So if you would like to put those in the chat, in the online chat, that would be great. And we will hear from you on those as well. So thank you. I'd now like to introduce Zonibel Woods, who's Senior Social Development Specialist at Asian Development Bank and has worked for a long time in the gender field. Zonibel is an expert in gender mainstreaming, policy development and capacity building, with leadership experience in civil society organisations prior to being at the Asian Development Bank. So one of those was the International Women's Health Coalition and the Ford Foundation. And really, she's been active in this area for how many years? We won't say. So she's been dedicated to environmental and sustainable development, especially in gender and climate change. So I'll hand over to you, Zonibel. Thank you.
I better grab this. Yeah, good morning, everyone. I know we've had lots of really good presentations this morning, and I will try my best to be brief because I think it'd be really important to hear from all of you and those online about the questions that you have, and for us to have an opportunity to engage a little bit more. But before I start my presentation, I hope that when I finish, you will, have drawn from my presentation one key message, and that is that extreme heat governance systems, including heat action plans, do not adequately address women's specific needs yet. However, these are evolving as they are very new instruments. And given the disproportionate impact that extreme heat is having on women, engendering these heat action plans is really critical in not only building women's resilience, but building everyone's resilience to increasing temperatures. So I really hope that I'm able to, in the next 10 minutes, make the case for this. And we've had quite a bit of discussion, I think, around yesterday of extreme heat examples. So I think, this is a group that's already, quite familiar with some of the data that I'm just going to very quickly go through. So if we look at 2024, it was the hottest year on record. And so more than 1.5 billion people have faced dangerous heat in 2024. And actually, this is not reflected in this slide, but the Copernicus report that was released earlier this year basically also highlighted that among those most affected are small island developing states. So we have, because of ocean heat waves as well as temperature rise, it is actually these small island development states that will be more affected. But if you look at this, I mean, Bangkok 76 days, Delhi had 40 days of temperatures over 40 degrees. So in Manila, while we may not have had, where I live and many of my colleagues here live, while we may not have had temperatures of over 40 degrees consistently over a long period of time, it was 37, 36 many days, and it was just when you don't have access to cooling, as many people don't in many of our countries, it is something that is very difficult to live with. Okay. So one of the challenges with heat waves is that there's not one agreed definition. So different bodies use different definitions. So the IPCC has one, ICRC has one. And so I think one of the most helpful things would be to kind of generally define what may constitute a heat wave. And of course, depending on the country, you will have sort of different thresholds. So for example, I was in Pakistan last week, and there, what they consider to be a heat wave is 40 degrees in sort of low lying areas and 35 in hill areas. I don't know about you, but I would find it difficult to survive in 40-degree weather on a regular basis, but that's sort of the definition that they're going with. And so I think, we have to look at how we're going to prepare for this growing threat. And, one of the challenges I think with heat waves is that, or extreme heat, is that we have sort of increasing temperatures, which require sort of long-term adaptation interventions. And then we have sort of the heat waves, which require sort of emergency preparedness. And so there's a combination, the added challenge to this is that there's a combination of where we have to be working on the long-term, short-term, and also kind of the emergency preparedness. So we've heard some of this yesterday, but in terms of extreme heat, we know that it is a challenge for public health, for infrastructure, for productivity, and for food security. And while it affects everyone, it does not affect everyone equally. And in all of this, women are disproportionately impacted due to a number of reasons, including sort of biological reasons, as well as social, cultural reasons. The majority of people in our region, or a great many of them, are living in urban heat islands. So informal settlements in all of our cities also have very particular challenges. We had done some initial work with this city of North Dhaka, where the mayor shared with us that every day they are receiving approximately 2,000 displaced people into informal settlements. And so that creates huge challenges for cities when dealing with urban heat and providing services for those people living in informal settlements. So over 4%, I thought this was interesting, and I wanted to share this with you because it is a problem that also has some solutions. So for example, over 4% of summer mortality in European cities is attributable to urban heat islands. Even when this mortality occurs in 2022, 56% more women died in the 22 European heat wave than men. So it is very much a gendered issue, but increasing tree cover in cities by 30% can reduce the temperature in urban environments by 1.3%, sometimes even more, and prevent about 1/3 of premature deaths attributable to urban heat islands in the summer, for example, in Europe. And we have actually, Medellin is one example, Paris is another example of cities that are actually increasing increasing their tree cover. Singapore is another example. In that increasing tree cover using nature-based solutions actually contributes to reducing the urban heat island effect. So I'm looking at my watch, so I'm kind of halfway through, I think. So extreme heat, as I mentioned, has a disproportionate impact on women. And so, we need to look at sort of where the kind of work that women do. So their informal work conditions, their traditional caregiving roles, their increased vulnerability during pregnancy. I think this is one of the areas where we have probably the most data and also emerging data where we know that 1% rise in maternal heat exposure increases risk of miscarriage or stillbirth by 27 to 42%. Increased gender-based violence, there's a very strong correlation between not just increased gender-based violence, but also conflict overall. Limited access to resources and services. So for example, women have 60% less access to cooling, in biological and physiological vulnerability. Okay, so we have these heat action plans. If you do a search on heat action plans, you'll find a number of really great websites that have been collecting them all. And we did an initial review, meaning I'm working on a technical assistance project looking at increasing women's resilience to extreme heat. And so we did an initial review of these heat action plans to see to what extent they're integrating gender-related issues, particularly focusing on women and girls' needs. And what we found is that most of them are gender blind. So they sort of lump women into sort of vulnerable groups, or just talk about women in terms of their pregnancy status. So pregnant women are more disproportionately impacted. This is true, but it's also true that girls, women at different sort of life stages, women going through menopause, are also disproportionately affected. And I don't have time to go through all the science, but I will at the end show you a QR code. If you're interested in some of this data, we have a data room at ADB where you can look at some more of this data. So overall, there's poor coordination between, because I think a comprehensive heat response requires a lot of cross-sectoral collaboration. So of course, similarly, I guess, to, other sort of DRR work, it also is challenged by poor coordination, underfunded. So you do a heat action plan, but most of them don't have any of the cost associated with it. So, people develop it and then just kind of don't know how to implement it or don't have the resources. And then most are heat wave response plans rather than sort of looking at prevention and looking at adaptation. This is nothing new to this audience, but there's generally a lack of gender responsive early warning systems as well. And generally very limited capacity of government on DRM, but also including on gender and DRM. Again, not new to many of you. So usually, a heat action plan should designate a lead body to coordinate the collaborative mechanisms and respond to emergencies. They need to implement accurate and timely alerts for heat health warnings, action thresholds, and risk communication. Behavior change is sort of one of the biggest challenges around sort of getting people to sort of manage the risk to extreme heat. And we know also that some people don't have an option, in terms of being able to not be outdoors at certain times and not, work at certain times. So it is very complex. Then, they develop a heat related health information plan in specifying what is communicated to whom and when. Excuse me. There should be short-term and long-term strategies on keeping the indoors cool as well, provides special care for vulnerable population groups. So for example, for the older persons in some countries that are sort of implementing heat action plans, they have a system where they either neighbors are going in to check on older persons, or a call, a phone call to check, a welfare check, and so on. So these are things that sort of are being done to really specifically meet the needs of vulnerable groups. And preparing for health and social care systems through staff training, planning, and ensuring suitable healthcare and environments. I think one of the challenges with the healthcare system is that when people go and present symptoms of heat stroke, they may not always recognize those. And so people get sort of misdiagnosed or missed, and sort of that puts them at greater risk. And engage in long-term urban planning and improve building design and energy and transport policies to reduce heat exposure. In countries, in tropical countries, such as ours and many countries in our region, we should no longer be building buildings out of glass, because that's like a hothouse. And so this is unsustainable for countries with rising temperatures. And I have 2 minutes. Okay, so I'll try to hurry through. Then this is just very briefly based on a study of the Ahmedabad Heat Action Plan. So this was one of the first heat action plans that was developed in 2010, following the 2010 heat wave. The focus was around public awareness, community outreach, early warning systems, and has actually successfully reduced heat-related mortality, but there's a gap in access to early warning systems for the vulnerable, particularly vulnerable women. So I won't go into some of the gender vulnerabilities to heat, but and I think this will be familiar to you in early warning systems, and related to our discussion yesterday, is like, how do we reach women who are illiterate, who have no access to phones, and so they are not able to receive things like WhatsApp-based warnings. So we need to look at sort of alternative ways that we're going to reach women. So there were some barriers to and some challenges with the Ahmedabad early warning system. So if you have pamphlets or advertisements, these are inaccessible to those who cannot read. And sometimes if there's a reliance on social networks, they may not provide sort of the kind of timely information that we need. There were some coping strategies for female workers. So, the issue was maybe that we get vendors to change their hours, or people to do different agriculture. Is that my alarm? Yes. Okay. I'm coming. I'm on my second last slide. Okay. So, and then again, we go back to women report having no choice but to continue working despite the heat due to their economic needs. So just very quickly, some recommendations around early warning systems for heat. So the making sure that we are targeting illiterate populations, that we look beyond mobile access solutions, that we take a community-centered approach, that we look at flexible work schedules, and that we continue to have regular monitoring and feedback. So very quickly, this is what we're doing at ADB. We have this gender and heat stress technical assistance. We want to increase knowledge of gender responsive heat action planning with DMCs. We're working in 6 DMCs. And we want to support development of gender responsive heat action plans and early warning systems, including institutional capacity to enable implementation and monitoring. And finally, DMCs is developing member countries of ADB. My apologies. And then we want to include the countries that we work with in demonstrating priority women-focused actions and solutions and facilitate knowledge sharing. So I'll stop here, but if you want to scan this QR code, that will take you to an infographic and also some more information about the issue related to gender heat and early warning systems and heat action plans and everything that I've been talking about. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Zonibel. It's really good to see the way in which this project is combining the most up-to-date science with a general community and national approaches to heat waves or to heat resilience, and as well as integrating the gender equality aspects right from the start. So I think sometimes when a new or emerging risk comes along, it's seen as a technical issue and dealt with as a technical issue, and all the learning from previous disaster risk management gets forgotten. And I think we saw that in the earlier days of the COVID response. So it's really good to see this integration of the gender equality elements right from the beginning with the technical knowledge. So thank you very much. Now we've heard from 5 of you this morning. So I want to, if we now have a chance to have some Q&A and discussion. Zonibel, do you want to come around the front as well? Yeah, I'll just move to the side. We're a little bit crowded here. Yep. Okay. So I'll just remind you who we've heard from this morning. So we had Veronica Cedillos from GeoHazards and Dr. Fahmida Khatun from Bangladesh for the Centre for Policy Dialogue before our morning tea. And then we've just heard from Krishna Karkee from Nepal, Ramona Miranda from Sri Lanka, and Zonibel from the gender components of ADB. So we have some people online and we also have people in the room. So I would like to give an opportunity for both groups to ask some questions. So for a start, I will just ask around the room and we'll get a couple of questions and either generally for the panelists or for specific panelists who you've just heard from. So I'll start with to see whether there's any questions in the room first. Yes. Okay. So you have wait for a microphone. Hold on. Can you give your name before you ask the question? Thank you.
Hello.
Hi,
I'm Akshay Balaji, and I work with the Asia Competitiveness Institute at the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy in NUS. Thank you for all of your presentations. I just had a common question for the panel. Because you operate in so many different contexts and you engage with so many different societies as part of your outreach programs or engagement programs, I just want to ask, because these are different contexts, have you had any experiences of resistance in participation in your programs due to any sort of reasons, like some societies might be more restrictive or more set in their ways and not willing to open up to something like this? In that case, how do you go forward and engage with them? And yeah, any innovative approaches you had to adopt based on your different contexts? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. I'll line up a couple more questions before we go to the panel. There's one down here.
I wanted to ask, so many of you are engaged in capacity building and awareness raising, and I wanted to know if you could talk a little bit about the different strategies you might use to engage local politicians versus community members, because they might have different roles in disaster risk reduction and might be able to make different decisions. But I would assume that you'd want targeted information to local politicians. I also think that in many of the spaces we work in many of the countries, there are electoral quotas that give women politicians at the local level a seat at the table, but perhaps not comfortable commanding the room. And so I was wondering if you're thinking a little bit about how to increase, actually effective autonomy and decision-making power, and what you think has worked, and what do you think are remaining questions?
Thank you very much for that question. I think I might just take those two questions for the panel. Both of them are a similar nature in that they're sort of about general strategies. So I might start with, who wants to start with the first question about the different contexts and resistance to participation in your programs and how you move forward? Veronica, would you like to?
Hello? Okay, I think it's working now. Thank you so much for your question. I think it's a really important point, and I think my colleague Ramona also mentioned it. I think one of her slides I wrote down lack of acceptance of relevance. And for me, one of the things that I think about as I was pointing out in a lot of my slides was that there's this overall benefit to the community. And I think when we try to frame it around, this is not just about empowering women and protecting them, but it's about empowering them so they can better protect the children of the community. It's about basically bringing resilience for all. And so if we go in with that angle, I feel like we have a lot less resistance because it is definitely a barrier and a challenge. And so the framing that you use is really important. And so we have found that in communities we expect that to be a pushback. That's helped a lot to think about the broader framing of what are the I forget who else was mentioning. I think it was maybe my colleague. Was it Fahmida? I forget who mentioned it, but women as agents of change, talking not about just their vulnerability, about how the weakness, but also how they can really bring about having a stronger community. So with that angle, I think it's really helpful.
Thank you very much, Veronica. Perhaps Ramona, would you like to comment on that as well? Because that was one of the issues that you raised. Yep. Oh, so Krishna. Okay, thank you.
I think Krishna.
Yeah, about this resistance, I also would like on the top of what Veronica says. So yeah, there is a lot of like a resistance, and then mostly the women, they have a double work at home. Like they have to take care of family, and especially some of the women whose families are migrated, men are migrated, and they have to take the double response. So it's a time management is also one very big problem, and another is a social issues. They are not trusting on the women. So what approach we are adopting is engaging men and boys to address the issues of women is very important. So first we approach the local leaders, elite groups, convince them, then after that working along with them also, not silo with women. So one approach we are adopting. And then for the another questions. Okay, for the local politicians, like here also that's exactly the same. When we are like we are mostly focusing on the women representatives at the local level to building their capacity, but when we invite only them and build their capacity, their voice is still not heard by the male politicians. So when we are organizing such kind of events, so like we are focusing our target. If we have a 70% participants are women, then we are adding 30% influential male also there to come to share the knowledge how important it's a woman's role in the decision making. So that way we are working mainly the engaging men and boys, not only the local level, even the mid level, even the higher level, even the Anil sir when he was a CEO, we are pushing him bring more women in the decision making level. So that's why.
Thank you, Krishna. I will just give an opportunity to Fahmida
Yeah,
to
just
comment on
Yeah,
either or both of
I'll
those.
share a little bit of experience in terms of, women's participation and the resistance you mentioned. I think Bangladesh's case is a bit unique in the sense that when Bangladesh was independent, liberated, lot of humanitarian aid came for the reconstruction of the economy because we inherited a war-affected economy. So international support came, and organizations like non-government organizations, many of them started working. BRAC is among them, and many others. So then what happened is that not only reconstruction or rehabilitation, but also there was microcredit provided to the women. So that really helped in terms of making women independent. So that is why when Bangladesh started to proceed, social development was preceded preceded the economic development. So many now, though economically we are a least developed country, but in many social indicators, Bangladesh is well ahead of many South Asian countries and also many African countries, compared to its peers. It's because of the non-government organizations' intervention in various forms, particularly microcredit, which had made them economically independent. So that's why I know in the rural areas, there are several barriers, of course, but I would say that those are the women who really fought day in and day out. They're less privileged, but they are surviving by their own, right, because they are, they're facing everyday challenges. In terms of political, local engagement in the politics, we have also seen that their participation in local level elections has increased tremendously compared to the national level elections. National level women are advanced, those are the privileged women, but they are the genuine women politicians. They face struggle and they fight along with the male politicians. So I would say that scenario is mixed, but there are of course resistance, but then there is an acceptability also in terms of like, not in case of disasters, but I have some examples I can give. For example, there are very good community health service providers. They are women. They go home to home, door to door. They provide, and they're really well respected, well regarded. They're welcome. Info ladies, for example, they provide information on various issues, including health, and they also connect, the families whose members are working abroad as migrant workers. They particularly not now, but 10 years back when the internet connection was not so common, they would go from home to home with a computer and connections, and they would connect with their children, particularly their sons who are working in the Middle Eastern countries or Southeastern countries, Southeast Asian countries. So they would connect. So that way, I think women are involved in various roles in the rural Bangladesh.
Very quickly, to your question, I think the way we tend to engage the local politicians is as partners and the community as the owners. So they are the ones who are living there. They have to own the plan. The politicians locally are the partners in the process because they will move. And the quotas, no, we haven't really explored that, but we'll certainly explore in the new upcoming thing.
Thank
Thanks.
you, Ramona. We're a little short of time. I won't take any more questions just yet because I just wanted to give Zonibel a chance to answer those. And there's also 2 questions online. So I'm sorry, we may not get to everyone else. We might have to continue the discussion at lunch, but we'll see how we go.
Yeah, just very quickly to answer your question on sort of the politicians. For our work in extreme heat, I think what I have learned is that at the city level, working at the city level is really critical because they're the ones that are making decisions sort of closer to the ground around, and they make decisions on cooling centers, for example, building codes, green spaces. And so I think it's really important to work with mayors. So that's one. And I think that they are often quite open to this because I think they see the issues a bit differently. And then I think that the resistance, I guess, is in the context of increasing temperatures. I wouldn't call it resistance, but I think this is sort of a lack of awareness that sort of creates a sense that this is not an issue. And I think it's a challenge for us because we live in countries where we always have summer, right? So there's a hot period, and so this comes and goes and it's normal. And so people, when we first started going to our different countries to talk about this issue, many of the government officials and even civil society organizations would say to us, well, this is not an issue for us. And then so it was not resistance, but I think lack of awareness. And so this is back to the discussion about why we need the data to build the case for what we are advocating for, and then the analysis of sort of, I guess, and whichever comes first, I'm not sure. But I remember, I will never forget, we were meeting with a Ministry of Agriculture in a country, and we wanted to talk to them about sort of extreme heat in general, particularly how it was affecting their workforce, because it has a huge impact on productivity. And they were like, well, it's not an issue. And so we said, okay, so is it having an impact on your crops, and agricultural outputs? And they said, yeah, actually. And so they started mentioning sort of the different instances where, increasing temperatures had an impact on their agricultural output. And then we said, how about livestock? And they're like, yeah, so they're, the chickens are dying, the cows are dying. And so we're like, okay, so if the cows are dying, the crops are failing, then, what about the humans that are like taking care of the crops and they're like, yeah. So I think it's a process of working with people where they're at and sort of raising awareness, which is why we've focused so much on doing that, through our TA, because I think we have a long way to go in getting an understanding that is from Asia and the Pacific. We have data from outside the region, but we need to support local research on this issue and generate research from the region by people from the region on this issue, because we don't have enough. And so there's a huge gap there.
Thank you, Zonibel. I've been told that we can extend this session until 12:30 because it's such a rich discussion. So I'm glad that we don't have to hurry it too much. I'm just going to go to two very specific questions online, and then we'll take, I know there were 3 people in the room with questions. 2 very specific questions online for you, Zonibel. So one of them about the heatwave issue. So one of them was about how do we provide targeted heatwave solutions to low-income groups, for example, in governmental subsidised housing. And another one, which is, I'll give you both at the same time because it's quite closely related, is talking about examples of policies or design solutions related to mobility and transportation that might address the urban heat island effect and its impact on women.
All right.
You've got 2 minutes at each of those.
Yeah. Okay, 2 minutes. Well, I am actually, I feel quite humbled sort of talking about this, because we have in the room someone that has been leading a lot of this work, and that's Bijal from the Mahila Housing Trust. So I think on the housing issue, on anything related to heat resilience, actually, she's someone that is much more knowledgeable than me on these issues. So maybe if you can respond also to that question. I know you had a comment, but just suffice to say, in terms of the housing issue, there's a lot of work happening in the region, some of which is ADB supported on housing development. The government of India has made a huge commitment on public housing. And I know some of my colleagues that have been working on this have been trying to ensure that women are involved in the decisions about sort of how that housing will be laid out, where the windows will be put, how to ensure that there's ventilation, because often women are actually not consulted in the design of this public housing, which results in people maybe not even wanting to move into that public housing. When I first started working on extreme heat, actually, there was an ADB funded project where it was an emergency assistance project where there had been some concerns from the community about moving into the housing that was built, because it had nothing to do with the distance or many of the other issues that sort of often come up. but it had to do with how hot it was for them. And so they did not actually want to move into that housing. So, but I hope that we can hear from you about the work that you're doing. And then very quickly, on examples, design solutions, mobility, transportation. Okay, so a very specific response to that. I worked in India on the secondary city transport metro system in Nagpur, in the city of Nagpur, which is actually quite a hot city. And one of the things that we're looking at as part of the design is integrating nature-based solutions, so green spaces, making the platforms, having them cool and shaded, as well as having misting stations so that while people are waiting, it's cool. We have also integrated sort of water stations. There's sort of a number of different things in order to make, transport sort of a little bit more heat resilient, particularly for women.
Okay, thank you, Zonibel. So, Bijal, would you like to ask your question or make a comment on whichever you like?
No, I had my comments on the earlier two questions. Our experience in engaging women more and more was that because we work directly, is that, we have been working with them long term. So when we went with, for example, as Zonibel said, with disaster like heat, which is quite given in India. And, so why women accepted it and how they came out was, first of all, that we are a women's organization. So our argument to the men, not that we had to face much, but they allow us very easily into the houses and talk to the women because most of the representatives are women. That's the first strategy. The second thing is that because you work long term, you have been trying to address their very short term needs like access to water or giving them toilets and maybe working on livelihoods and health issues. And so that's when, because there is already an atmosphere of trust, that it's easier to go and talk to them about what I would say in this case, like heat is a slow onset but potent disaster. And just because it's slow onset and given, people would not talk much about it. So it was then easier to bring out the women. And on the, working with the politicians, I completely agree with Zonibel that, working with local level politicians is very important. But we also understood that at most times they don't understand what climate change is and how heat is going to impact the entire city. And so we have developed manuals and, we are actually training these local level counselors with the women in the same room. So that's one strategy. And then, the women start asking for budgetary allocations in terms of heat and water, and because water is very closely related to it. So I think access to water is also very important as a mitigation strategy. And that's when they listen. Sorry for the long.
Thank you very much, Bijal. So we did have a question from Director General Health. Madhavi, did you want to intervene or?
I had a question. but
Okay,
he can-
well, we'll go to Director General first and then Madhavi. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. So my question is focusing to Veronica. So during your presentation, you mentioned about the empower or equip with the youth, especially on life-saving skills kind of thing. So in Sri Lanka, we had a recent initiative with the Education Ministry, and we plan 10,400 schools, government school, and there are, you may be heard about girls guide, and the girls cadetting platoons, cadets, they are just youth, 16 to 17 years. So we take them into, especially on DRR, within these school safety program. So that kind of initiative you can even touch upon because they have a soft skills rather than ordinary students because they train during school time, so they have a skills. And other thing is in Sri Lanka now already political landscape matter a lot for especially on the women issues because last 5 years there was no election, there's no urban council elected, and municipal and Pradesh Sabha, Palat Sabha, and there's no chief minister. So there we have an issue because the political landscape also matter in some other way to this issue. And in other thing is, especially Sri Lanka, we had a 3 decades some kind of insurgency. And then we were impact on COVID, then Easter Sunday attack, then economic crisis. So women also part of it. So to heal their mindset, nearly with over 4,000 to 5,000 women combatants died there, both sides. So they have a different thing because they are part of most of time they were the collateral damage kind of a multi-hazard situation taking place in especially north and east. So we have to enhance the resilience and localization while doing the capacity building towards the enemy. But that also specifically there are most sensitive, especially on the north and east. If you take even we can talk about empowering the women and they are taking into leadership, but especially the eastern part, they were in sideline. They in a watertight compartment because the women headed males never allow them to appear in the front. That's the ground reality. So we can mitigate those things through a lot of awareness program. We do awareness, preparedness, mock drills, different in the ground level, local level. But empowering women, especially in a community-based kind of a thing is so vital to success for this endeavor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, DG.
So yeah.
You wanted to make a comment, Veronica?
Yeah, that's okay.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much for that. That's really important. I think one of the things that stood out to me from what you were saying is this context-specific situations and how do you think about what is the situation here? What are the particular barriers? One of the things that we like to think through as we're working in a community is doing what we call a community characterization, understanding what local groups are trusted, who's influential, and as was being mentioned, and maybe you need certain groups or certain people to come and be really the face of engaging women. What are ways that we can make sure that their voices are being heard and that we're engaging them in a way that's respectful of the local customs? One of the things, let me see. Yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Veronica. And I'll just go to Madhavi from ADB.
Thank you, Mary. So your organizations are doing amazing work and really may your tribe increase. Just looking at it from the other side, what would you need in terms of resources and finances, research support, etc.? Because we have here members from heads of government, we have members from international development organizations, from research institutes. So what are you looking for to take all these initiatives forward?
Thank you very much. I'm sure they'll be very happy to answer that question.
Yeah,
We'll start with Ramona.
Yeah, like I said, I think because we are starting this sort of particular project that we're working with 5 particular communities, and then this is going to be like a research project in a sense of like, while we're implementing stuff, we'll be trying to get the information out of. So quite happy to partner with anybody who wants to come on board to be part of that, collecting that information and just monitoring and seeing how these changes are happening. So that, I mean, just saying it in an overall way, we can sit down and then figure out which aspects of those can be. That is one I can immediately think of. Of course, resources, quite happy for anyone to come and expand this beyond. But then just talking about something concrete that we can immediately start off with, because we're starting some of these ground level projects in June, right? So we can even start thinking about and designing some, and then that will go on for 3 years. So that's, I can think of other stuff as others respond.
It's in our country, especially in the gender in DRR. So we have very limited resource in our country. So only thoughts-based few research has been done. So we would like to explore resources and partnership to conduct the research in different areas on gender and DRR, and as well as to build the capacity for the, especially we are focusing for the women representatives. Building capacity is very much needed work for right now. And we also need to develop different kind of monitoring tools to see the progress on this gender and DRR. So that's all.
Thank you, Krishna.
I may make a brief comment on that as well. So thank you for that question. First of all, I'm grateful for this convening because I'm learning a lot of different things. One of the things, for example, that I learned from yesterday, I think it was my the presenter Sonia, who mentioned about the importance of mental health for to reduce gender-based violence, and that to me, we do trainings on mental health, but I never connected it to the reduction in gender-based violence. So anyway, just learning from other colleagues, learning about the research, it equips us on our end. Some of the funding that we get is through like family foundations, and I have to make the case. Why is this so important? Why are we taking this angle? And so understanding all of this is really helpful to us. I'll also say that one of the things that I feel like we could improve as an organization is on the solution side. We have strongly emphasized the technical solutions and trying to tap into what's already there. Where I'm trying to learn more and trying to leverage more of is understanding how can we better equip people on the financial side. So what are some of those solutions? So I'm really looking forward to the last session because this is an area that I think our team can learn a lot more about, like how do we leverage those learnings and what are the opportunities that we can think about to support communities as they try to take solutions forward.
Thank you. And Fahmida?
Yeah, I will just echo some of the issues mentioned by my colleagues here. One is, as I have mentioned in my presentation, also the data. For a researcher, disaggregated real-time data is very, very important. And since we do not have enough financial support, because data collection involves a lot of financial resources, this is one. And then related to quite often when you go to the villages or local levels for data collection, there's also a need for capacity development. So you don't end just by prescribing some recommendations for the policymakers at the policy level, but also build their capacity to cope with the disasters, various types of disasters. It could be nature-based solutions, some technical solutions also, and of course for monitoring and evaluation capacity of the researchers or the NGOs themselves, so that they can monitor and evaluate the activities which are taken by the policymakers. So I think data, capacity development, and evaluation.
Thank you very much, Fahmida. Now, I think we have time for one more question from the room. I think the first hand up, Sonia, please go ahead. There's a microphone next to you. Thank you.
Thank you all speakers for sharing your experience. And now that for a day and a half, we talked about gender and disaster and also like this issue of sex disaggregated data, its limitation, its need, and it's also, we also presented like a sort of a solution for our pilot initiative of how sex disaggregated data can be collected. So my question to the policymakers, respectable policymakers who are sitting in this room, that after this like 1.5 day of brainstorming and discussion, do you really see that the kind of the pilot initiative that we have taken, maybe it's not perfect, but do you see that there's a possible collaboration or any value for you to, integrate the tool that we have developed in your everyday working? Or it's like all rubbish and you just go back from this meeting and totally forget about what we discussed and then continue your status quo practice? Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you. So it's there are a lot of takeaways throughout this 1.5 days, because different practitioners, academia, and all the policymakers took part. Even some certain extent, some INGOs and NGOs also. So there are a lot of takeaways, because this is going to be a good platform to have some kind of holistic kind of approach. Through discussions, we identify certain gaps with practicing in our country, especially in Sri Lanka. So we will collaborate further, and we extend our hands, all the participants and all the friendly countries who are taking part, to support us to empower this gender and disaster. Because as I mentioned, we have 153 actions. There are a lot of entry points for the government, public, private, then UN entities, then NGOs and INGOs. Yeah. So we will see after this workshop, we will strengthen and enhance our capacity to give more concern on the gender-based, especially gender-based violence, as well as strengthening women capacity in future. Thank you very much.
Actually, we have come here to attend this workshop to learn and to implement which are possible in our countries. We are taking notes every day, not just for leisure we have come here. You see that, like my colleague from Sri Lanka, in Bangladesh, we have many collaboration with many academics. We have our Dhaka University and we have BRAC University and many others. We have regularly collaboration, and nowadays, we are under an interim government. Our advisor every time invites those who are working outside the government to take their comments and to implement those in real life cases. When last year we faced a lot of flash floods, this year we are planning to build shelters in the locality, not in the remote areas, 3 or 4 places. In the ground floor, they will sell their products in the normal time. And when there is sign of disaster in the first floor, we will build 2 or 3 rooms so that some 25 or 40 people can take shelter. We are learning them from BRAC, one of our NGOs. So we are also taking good ideas, good initiatives from others. And from here, I think we should have a group, male group, those who are participating here. So we can also communicate with each other and can get the good experiences to implement in our countries also. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Director General. I think that's a really good point to end this really rich session where we've heard from the civil society organisations and the ways in which they're working with communities and with governments. And yesterday we heard from the governments about the way that they're working with their communities and civil society. So I think that those things combined with the academic research that we have in the room is just a wonderful congruence of expertise and ways of moving forward. So this has been a really good session, and thank you all. So we will now close this session and break for lunch.